Well, hello! Welcome back to my channel. Jashana here to talk about my new rating and reviewing system. I feel like I change my rating system about every 6 months or so. I make adjustments to it constantly. And in the past, what I have done for the past couple years actually is I took G from Book Roast, does the Caw Pile, which a lot of people have taken and either just use Caw Pile or they have adapted it. I adapted it a little bit. So the way that works is you have these different categories, characters, atmosphere, writing style, plot, intrigue, logic, and enjoyment, I think is what Caw Pile is. And I changed up my categories a little bit, but you have these different categories that you rate on a 1 to 10 scale, and then you get that average on a 1 to 10 scale that then you translate into a 1 to 5 scale. So what I've done that for a while. I did adjust it to my categories that work better for me, so mine wasn't Caw Pile necessarily, but it was my 1 to 10 system. And the biggest thing I've adjusted over the years is the translation from the 1 to 10 into 5. Like, what is a 6.75 on my 1 to 10? What does that translate to? I have changed that a bit. So books over the years have gotten different ratings, and I've had to go back and change the rating because now they went from being a 3-star to a 2.5 star because I adjusted that scale, if that makes sense. And it's all just very personal. I mean, rating books in general, I think, is an incredibly personal, individual thing, how you feel about it. And I have made this argument many times that it's incredibly subjective. It's all subjective, I think. Unless you are literally a book editor and you are going through and editing for grammar, spelling, punctuation, and formatting, those you can certainly objectively get wrong. But even sometimes that stuff, people do different stylistic things, right? So anyway, that's a whole other conversation. But I'm changing it up this year because what I have found over the last couple years with doing the 1 to 10 scale, I do enjoy doing that because I get such a detailed, my top 10 books of the year. There's 3 that are 5 stars, right? But they technically all have different ratings on my 1 to 10 scale. So I can actually see literally which one I rated higher than the other, even though it translated to 5 for all of them, if that makes sense. So I do enjoy that. But the thing is, I end up knowing what I'm going to rate it just based on how I felt about it. I will read a book and say, this feels like probably like a 3 or 3.5, and then I'll go through and do my 1 to 10, and it turns out to be a 3 or a 3.5 or whatever. I'm very rarely wrong about it because, I'm attuned to what I like and what works for me. So I'm going to simplify it a bit, but in doing this, I'm changing how I review books. So I'm going to take that 1 to 10 scale, those categories, which I'll explain in a minute, but I'm taking those categories and I'm not going to rate on those categories. I'm not going to give a score, but I am going to use those categories to help me organize my reviews better. Because right now, when I review, I'm just by the seat of my pants. I'm flailing. I'm just like, this is kind of what the book is about. These are some things, some pros and some cons for me. And then there we go. But sometimes I forget things, or I just feel as though I'm not being as thorough as I could be. So that's what I'm doing. And I'm going to be using TheStoryGraph. As y'all know by this point, I have said sayonara to Goodreads. I still have the account, and I probably will still put reviews specifically of books by marginalized authors on Goodreads because I don't know if it's going to hurt them to not have more reviews on Goodreads where people go more still. So I'm still going to have the account. I'm just not using it to track my reading and my stats and all of that, and my TBR shelves and all of that. And on the TheStoryGraph, you can do quarter stars, and I'm going to utilize quarter stars because having just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it feels so restrictive for me personally. I know it doesn't for everybody, but it does for me because sometimes I read a book where I'm like, yeah, it's like 3, but it's like a lower 3, or it's a higher 3. and so on and so forth. So I'm going to use the quarter stars to my advantage in that regard, to make it less restrictive for myself. And also, I very rarely have books in the 1 or 2 star range. Again, if you've been here for a hot minute, you know this. I DNF pretty freely. If I'm feeling like, oh, I'm kind of hating this, more often than not, I'm going to DNF it. So I end up not having, I hardly have any 1 stars and only a couple of 2. So for that reason, the 1, 1.25, and 1.5 are all grouped together. And this range is basically books that felt physically painful to read. Just basically like, bro, I'm straight up not having a good time. Just a pain in the ass to read. That's the 1, 1.25, or 1.5, that range. So if something was literally just, I hate this with every fiber of my being, that would obviously be probably a 1. Could be a 1.25. 1.5 might be just like, oh, this was so bad, but it wasn't like the worst thing I've ever read. So that's that range, physically painful to read. The next range is 10 out of 10 would not recommend. Books where they weren't the worst thing ever, and I basically didn't have any kind of a good time reading them. But I guess I could see why some people like them. I just personally wouldn't be recommending them to everybody. And that's going to be a 1.75 or a 2. So depending on the level to which I felt, I would not want to recommend it. It'd be 1.75 or a 2. The next range is I mostly didn't like this or had a generally bad time, and that's going to be a 2.25 or a 2.5. Think the classic Rage of Dragons. I think I gave that one a 2.5. I would probably actually give it a 2.25 on this quarter star scale. And then we have another range that has 3 options for it, and this is because this is the range that I utilize the most, right around 3 stars. So this will be books that are generally enjoyable. I don't regret reading them. I liked it mostly. And so it'll be either 2.75, 3, or 3.25. Because like I said, some books where I'm like, it's like a 3, but like a lower 3, that would be a 2.75. And some are a 3, but slightly kind of a higher 3, that would be a 3.25. And then we have books where I liked them a lot, but I didn't love them. I had a pretty dang good time. I'm pretty excited that I read it, but I'm not wanting to scream from the rooftops about it necessarily. And that's going to be 3.5 and 3.75. Books where I felt like they were truly great and I mostly had a great time with it is going to be 4 and 4.25. And then the next range is books that were either just super, super fun, great time, or super profound in some way, and where I kind of felt like they blew me away a little bit. Like this book kind of blew me away. And that will be 4.5 or 4.75. And then the ever elusive 5-star, which I don't give out very often, are books that are basically perfection to me, and books where I want to be reading them all the time until I die. I want to be constantly reading these books. I can't do that, of course, but when I have that feeling of just, oh my God, I love it so much. So that's how I'm going to do it. Obviously very personal to me and how I feel, as any rating system is going to be. And of course, it could change because that's how I am. Now for reviews, like I said, I want to try to kind of have them organized a little bit more. So I'm going to use those categories from the 1 to 10 scale. I also added, I have a spreadsheet where I have all my stuff, and I have one tab that's for reviews. So I have the book title, the author, and then I added in a column for the premise where I can just kind of put the premise, the synopsis there. And for fiction, I'm going to always be discussing the characters, the world building, the writing style, the authorial voice, the plot/pacing, themes, and then enjoyment. Was it a good time? And then I'll have the rating, of course. Now for nonfiction, because I did read a bit more last year and I want to continue reading a bit more, and obviously with nonfiction you can't talk about it the same way as fiction because there's no world building and characters necessarily and all that. So currently what I'm going to go with for when I'm reviewing nonfiction is talk about the writing style, my interest level, if my interest was kept or not, if there was any new or profound information presented. And this is incredibly personal because, you know, I've read at this point many books, not many, but I've read a handful of books on, let's say, like race in the United States, systemic racism in the United States. So some of these books, it's not new information for me, but I want to look at it as if this was a new concept to me, how would this book have presented this information? Would it have been new information that the common person doesn't necessarily automatically have, or is it profound information, etc.? And then, was the book successful in what it was trying to do? What it seemed like the message was? Do I feel that it did a good job at that? And then the rating. And everything for fiction also is my personal opinion. So like for characters, did I enjoy the characters? Did I feel that the characters had nuance and complexity? The world building, did I feel that the world building was interesting, again, complex, described well? All of this is entirely personal. So that's how I'm gonna do it. Because like I said, doing the 1 to 10 scale, giving a point, giving a score for every category, and then getting the average, and then that being translated. It was all formulas I had. I wasn't doing the math necessarily, but it was a little tedious to set up, and every time I want to change it, it's like tedious to go and change all these formulas. And again, most of the time, I already knew what the book rating was going to end up being, what the 1 to 5 scale was going to end up being. I just had that feeling. So why do all that extra shit? Basically is how I feel. So there we have it. I just wanted to explain that since it's going to look a little bit different moving forward, or I'm going to talk about my ratings and my reviews slightly differently. And sometimes I might not have that much to say about a certain thing, like an authorial voice. If there's an authorial voice where it was just there and I didn't really feel any particular way about it, obviously I'm not going to have that much to say about that. But I just want to like have these categories to help keep me more organized when I am reviewing. If you have some really unique way of reviewing or rating books, let me know down below how you handle all of this. You stick with just the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stars and that works for you, or if you do something more complex, etc., let me know. It's always interesting to see how people do that. As always, thank you so much for your time. Hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you later. Bye-bye.